The evening air was cool as Dr. Andre Wilson, 38, drove his Tesla Model S through the quiet streets of Riverside. After a 14-hour shift at Mercy General Hospital, all he wanted was to get home, call his wife Natalie, and collapse into bed before tomorrow's challenging surgery schedule. The soft jazz playing through his car speakers was interrupted by flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. Andre sighed, checking his speedometer. He'd been going exactly the speed limit. Still, he eased his car to the curb, turned down his music, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Officer James Rutherford, 49, had been with the Riverside Police Department for 23 years. His close-cropped gray hair and stern face had become familiar to the department's younger officers, who both respected and feared his reputation. Rutherford had been passed over for promotion 3 times, always citing political correctness as the reason. Tonight, he was in a particularly foul mood after being reprimanded by Lieutenant Powell for his aggressive approach during a routine traffic stop last week. Rutherford approached the Tesla, flashlight beam deliberately aimed at Andre's eyes despite the well-lit street. He noticed the driver's hands positioned carefully on the wheel, a gesture he'd seen before from those who'd had previous negative encounters with law enforcement. License and registration, Rutherford demanded, without offering a greeting or explanation for the stop. "Good evening, officer," Andre replied calmly. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Rutherford's face hardened. "License and registration first, then we'll get to questions." Andre nodded. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my jacket pocket and my registration in the glove compartment." "Is that all right?" "Just make it quick," Rutherford snapped. With deliberate movements, Andre retrieved his license and the car's documentation, handing them over while maintaining eye contact with the officer. He recognized the look in Rutherford's eyes. He'd seen it before, that mixture of suspicion and presumption that seemed to appear whenever certain officers saw a black man in an expensive car. Rutherford examined the license, his eyebrows rising slightly at the MD designation. "Dr. Wilson? What kind of doctor drives around this neighborhood at this hour?" "I'm a neurosurgeon at Mercy General. Just finished my shift and heading home," Andre explained, his voice measured and professional. Rutherford's flashlight beam swept across the interior of the Tesla, lingering on Andre's hospital badge hanging from the rearview mirror and the medical bag on the passenger seat. "Pretty nice car for a doctor," he commented. "How long have you owned this vehicle?" 3 years, Andre replied, feeling a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He'd been through this routine before, the implication that the car might be stolen, that he couldn't possibly afford it legitimately. "Do you mind stepping out of the vehicle, Dr. Wilson?" Rutherford asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. "May I ask why, officer?" "I still don't know why I was pulled over." "Your taillight is out," Rutherford lied. "And I noticed you swerving a bit back there." "Been drinking tonight, doctor." Andre knew his taillights were functioning perfectly. He'd had the car serviced just last week, and he hadn't touched alcohol in years. Still, he recognized the dangerous territory of challenging an officer like Rutherford. "I haven't been drinking, officer. I've been performing brain surgery for the past 14 hours. Then you won't mind stepping out of the car and performing a quick sobriety test." "For public safety," Rutherford added with a thin smile. Knowing refusal would only escalate the situation, Andre complied, carefully exiting the vehicle. The night air felt colder now as he stood on the sidewalk under Rutherford's scrutinizing gaze. "Walk heel to toe in a straight line," Rutherford instructed, his hand resting casually on his holster. Andre performed the test flawlessly, his surgeon's precision evident in each step. He then followed Rutherford's instructions to touch his nose with his eyes closed, stand on one leg, and recite the alphabet backward. "Impressive, doctor," Rutherford said, though his tone suggested anything but admiration. "Mind if I take a look in your vehicle?" "Actually, I do mind, officer," Andre replied firmly. "I don't consent to a search. I complied with your sobriety test, which I've clearly passed. Unless you have probable cause, I'd like my license and registration back so I can go home." Rutherford's expression darkened. When someone refuses a search, that usually means they have something to hide, or it means they understand their Fourth Amendment rights, Andre countered, immediately regretting his words as Rutherford's face flushed with anger. "Sir, I observed your vehicle swerving, and I detect the odor of marijuana," Rutherford claimed, fabricating probable cause. "That gives me the right to search this vehicle." Before Andre could protest further, Rutherford was calling for backup. Within minutes, another patrol car arrived, and Officer Trent Blake, 31, joined Rutherford. "What's the situation, Jim?" Blake asked, glancing between Rutherford and Andre. "Potential DUI and drug possession. Subject is being uncooperative," Rutherford explained, deliberately avoiding mentioning Andre's profession. Blake nodded, though he looked somewhat uncertain as he took in Andre's appearance, the professional attire, the calm demeanor, the clear eyes. "Sir, we're going to conduct a search of your vehicle," Rutherford announced. "Please stand over here with Officer Blake." Andre felt his heart pounding, but kept his exterior composed. "I want to formally state that I do not consent to this search, and I believe you lack probable cause." "Noted," Rutherford replied dismissively before beginning to search the Tesla. Andre watched helplessly as Rutherford roughly rummaged through his belongings. The officer pulled out Andre's medical bag, unzipping it to reveal various surgical instruments, prescription medication samples for patients, and medical reference materials. "What's all this?" Rutherford called out, holding up a sealed package containing a specialized cranial drill bit for tomorrow's surgery. "That's surgical equipment, officer. For brain surgery. As I mentioned, I'm a neurosurgeon." Rutherford examined a vial of medication. "And these prescription drugs? You just carry these around." "Those are medication samples for patients with post-operative pain management. They're properly labeled and sealed," Andre explained, his professional patience beginning to wear thin. Officer Blake shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that something wasn't right about this stop. Rutherford emerged from the car holding Andre's phone. "Got a lot of calls from the hospital here. Let's see who else you've been contacting." "You have no right to search my phone," Andre protested. "That requires a warrant." "Just establishing your identity and verifying your story, doctor," Rutherford replied, emphasizing the title with subtle mockery. As Rutherford scrolled through Andre's recent calls, he found multiple contacts from Mercy General Hospital, including one labeled Commissioner Rutherford Pre-Op. The officer paused, his expression momentarily confused. "Why are you in contact with Commissioner Rutherford?" he demanded, referring to the police commissioner without realizing the connection to himself. "Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing any patient's medical information," Andre replied firmly. "But I assure you, all my contacts are professional in nature." Rutherford's suspicion seemed to deepen. "You expect me to believe the police commissioner is your patient?" "As I said, I cannot discuss patient matters," Andre repeated. "Now, unless you're planning to arrest me, I'd like my belongings returned so I can go home." Rutherford hesitated, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Turn around, Dr. Wilson. Place your hands behind your back. You're arresting me." "On what charge?" Andre asked incredulously. "Suspicion of possession of controlled substances and resisting an officer," Rutherford stated, reaching for his handcuffs. Officer Blake intervened. "Jim, are you sure about this? His medical credentials check out. The medication is clearly labeled for professional use." "Stay in your lane, Blake," Rutherford snapped. "This is my stop." As Rutherford secured the handcuffs around Andre's wrists, tightening them unnecessarily, Andre maintained his dignity despite the humiliation burning through him. "Officer Rutherford," Andre said, reading the nameplate on the uniform, "I want you to know that I'm memorizing every detail of this interaction. Your badge number, your partner's name, the time, and the fact that your dash cam should be recording all of this." Rutherford smirked. "Threatening an officer now. Let's add that to the charges." "Not a threat, officer. Just exercising my right to document police misconduct," Andre replied calmly. "And for the record, I installed a dashboard camera in my car after the last time I was pulled over for no reason. It's been recording since your lights came on." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Rutherford's face as he glanced at the small camera mounted on Andre's windshield, its red light blinking steadily. "Get in the car," Rutherford ordered, guiding Andre toward the patrol vehicle with unnecessary force. As he was placed in the back of the police car, Andre caught a glimpse of Officer Blake, who was now on his radio, his expression troubled as he looked between Andre and Rutherford. The patrol car pulled away, leaving Andre's Tesla on the curb, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. Inside the vehicle, Andre closed his eyes, focusing on maintaining his composure. Tomorrow's surgery was complex and critical, a procedure few surgeons in the country could perform. He needed to get through this ordeal quickly, not just for his own sake, but for his patients. What Officer Rutherford didn't yet realize was that his impulsive decision to arrest Dr. Andre Wilson would set in motion a sequence of events that would irrevocably alter both their lives. By morning, the consequences of this traffic stop would reach far beyond anything either man could imagine. As the patrol car navigated the night streets toward the station, Andre watched the city lights blur outside the window. Despite the handcuffs cutting into his wrists and the injustice of his situation, a strange calm settled over him. Years of performing high-stakes surgery had taught him patience and perspective, qualities that would serve him well in the hours to come. What Officer Rutherford had inadvertently done tonight wasn't just falsely arrest a respected neurosurgeon. He had set the stage for a powerful lesson in consequences that neither man would ever forget. The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Police Station buzzed overhead as Officer Rutherford led Dr. Andre Wilson through the processing area. Several officers glanced up from their desks, eyebrows raising at the sight of a well-dressed man in handcuffs being escorted by the notoriously difficult Rutherford. "Got a drug suspect?" Rutherford announced to the booking officer, a heavy-set woman named Gloria Jenkins, 52, who had seen it all in her 27 years at the department. "Found prescription drugs without proper documentation, potential intent to distribute." Gloria looked at Andre skeptically. "Name?" Before Rutherford could answer, Andre spoke up. "Dr. Andre Wilson, Chief of Neurosurgery at Mercy General Hospital." Gloria's fingers paused over her keyboard as she looked up sharply. "Wilson? The brain surgeon?" Andre nodded while Rutherford scoffed. "Claims to be. Had a bag full of surgical tools and prescription medications in his fancy Tesla." "Because I am a neurosurgeon," Andre stated calmly. "Those are surgical implements I need for an operation scheduled for tomorrow morning. A very important operation, I might add." Gloria frowned, looking between the two men. "Jim, did you verify his credentials?" "Found a hospital ID, but those can be faked," Rutherford replied defensively. "Plus, he was being uncooperative, refused a search initially." "As is my constitutional right," Andre added. "I'd like to make a phone call, please. I need to ensure my patient's surgery isn't delayed due to this misunderstanding." Gloria nodded slowly, her experienced eyes taking in Andre's composed demeanor and professional bearing, contrasting sharply with Rutherford's increasingly agitated state. "Take these cuffs off him, Jim," she instructed. "Let's verify his identity properly before processing." Rutherford hesitated but complied reluctantly, removing the handcuffs while muttering under his breath. Andre rubbed his wrists, noting the red marks where the cuffs had been unnecessarily tight. Just then, Lieutenant Diana Powell, 45, strode into the booking area, her authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. With her sharp intelligence and reputation for fairness, Powell had risen through the ranks despite the department's old guard resistance to female leadership. "What's going on here, Rutherford?" she asked, her gaze moving from the officer to Andre, then stopping in clear recognition. "Dr. Wilson? What on earth?" "Lieutenant," Andre acknowledged with visible relief. "It seems there's been a significant error in judgment tonight." Powell turned to Rutherford, her expression hardening. "Explain yourself, officer. Why is the chief of neurosurgery at Mercy General in our booking area?" Rutherford straightened defensively. "Suspicious behavior, ma'am. Driving an expensive vehicle, possession of prescription drugs, and what appeared to be drug paraphernalia. Surgical instruments," Andre interjected. "As I repeatedly explained." Powell's eyes narrowed. "Rutherford, my office." Now, looking to Andre, her tone softened. "Dr. Wilson, please accept my sincere apologies. Gloria will get you some water while I sort this out." As Rutherford followed Powell toward her office, the lieutenant stopped abruptly, turning to face him in the hallway. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "Dr. Wilson isn't just any surgeon. He's here specifically to perform a critical operation tomorrow morning." Rutherford shrugged. "With all due respect, ma'am, I was just following protocol. If he's legitimate, he has nothing to worry about." Powell's expression turned incredulous. "Nothing to worry about? You just arrested and handcuffed the only surgeon in the state qualified to perform the procedure scheduled for Commissioner Rutherford tomorrow morning." The color drained from Officer Rutherford's face. "Commissioner Rutherford, your father," Powell confirmed, watching realization dawn on the officer's face. "The commissioner's aneurysm requires a specialized procedure, and Dr. Wilson was specifically flown in as a consulting surgeon." The procedure has been scheduled for weeks. Rutherford leaned against the wall, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. I didn't know. The commissioner never mentioned. The commissioner is a private man, especially regarding his health, Powell replied. But the department has been making arrangements for his surgery for the past month. How did you not know about this? We haven't spoken much lately, Rutherford admitted, the personal admission clearly difficult for him. Meanwhile, in the booking area, Gloria handed Andre a cup of water and a phone. I'm really sorry about this, Doctor. Officer Rutherford can be, well, he has his own way of doing things. That's one way to put it, Andre replied, taking a sip of water before dialing. Hello, Dr. Patel. It's Andre. Listen, I've had a situation. Yes, I'm fine, but I'm currently at the Riverside Police Station. There was an incident during a traffic stop. He explained the situation briefly, emphasizing the importance of being prepared for tomorrow's surgery, regardless of how long this took to resolve. After finishing the call, Andre glanced up to see Powell returning without Rutherford. Her expression was a mixture of professional composure and genuine regret. Dr. Wilson, I cannot adequately express how deeply sorry I am for what you've experienced tonight, she began, sitting across from him. Officer Rutherford's conduct was completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this department. Andre nodded, studying her face. I appreciate that, Lieutenant Powell. Though I must say, this isn't the first time I've experienced this kind of treatment from law enforcement. Powell didn't deflect or become defensive, which raised his estimation of her. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised to hear that, and it's part of a larger problem we're trying to address. But in this specific case, there's something you should know. She hesitated, then continued. The patient you're scheduled to operate on tomorrow morning is Commissioner Richard Rutherford. Yes, I'm aware, Andre replied. A complex basilar tip aneurysm requiring specialized approach. What you may not be aware of is that Officer James Rutherford is the commissioner's son. Andre's expression shifted as the pieces fell into place. I see. That explains his reaction when he saw the commissioner's name in my call log. Powell nodded. The relationship between them has been strained in recent years. I don't believe Officer Rutherford was aware of his father's condition or your role in his treatment. Andre took another sip of water, processing this new information. That puts things in an interesting perspective, doesn't it? It does, Powell agreed. I placed Officer Rutherford on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation of tonight's events. In my car? My medical equipment? Andre asked. Being brought here as we speak, Powell assured him. I've also arranged for an officer to escort you home and then to the hospital in the morning, if you'd like. Andre considered this. That won't be necessary, but I would appreciate having my vehicle and equipment returned promptly. That surgical drill bit I mentioned is custom-made for tomorrow's procedure. As they spoke, Officer Blake entered the station, carrying Andre's medical bag. Lieutenant, I've secured Dr. Wilson's vehicle in the station parking lot. All his belongings are accounted for. He turned to Andre. Doctor, I wanted to apologize personally for what happened tonight. I should have intervened sooner. Andre accepted the bag, checking its contents carefully. You were following your senior officer's lead. But in the future, I hope you'll remember that your oath is to the law, not to other officers. Blake nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. The station doors opened again, and all eyes turned to see Commissioner Richard Rutherford, 74, walking slowly into the booking area, leaning on a cane. Despite his obvious physical frailty, his commanding presence was undeniable. His silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, so similar to his son's, scanned the room before settling on Andre. Dr. Wilson, he said, his voice still strong despite his condition. I just received a most disturbing phone call from the hospital. Andre stood, automatically assessing the commissioner's gait and color with a medical professional's eye. Commissioner Rutherford, you should be resting. Your procedure is scheduled for early tomorrow. And I understand you were just placed in handcuffs by one of my officers, Rutherford replied. Specifically, by my son. Is that correct? Powell stepped forward. Commissioner, you really shouldn't be here. Your health. My health is precisely why I need to be here, Diana, the commissioner interrupted. If my surgeon is being harassed by my own department, by my own son, no less, then my health is very much at stake. He turned back to Andre. Dr. Wilson, I cannot begin to apologize adequately for what's happened tonight. Andre studied the older man thoughtfully. Commissioner, with all due respect, you should be at home preparing for tomorrow. Surgical outcomes are better when patients are well rested and less stressed. The commissioner's mouth twitched in what might have been appreciation for Andre's professionalism. I'm more concerned about my surgeon being well rested and less stressed at the moment. I've handled worse, Andre replied simply. Now, if my car and belongings are ready, I should be going. I have preoperative preparations to review before tomorrow. The commissioner nodded, then asked, And will you still be performing my surgery, Dr. Wilson? After what's happened tonight, I would understand completely if you chose to recuse yourself. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Andre. The question hung in the air, laden with implications about power, race, professionalism, and the complex interplay between them all. Andre's expression remained neutral, though his mind was racing with considerations both professional and personal. His decision now would affect not just his career and the commissioner's life, but potentially the policies and culture of the entire department. I'll see you at 7 a.m., Commissioner, Andre finally said. As scheduled, relief washed over the commissioner's face. Thank you, Doctor. As Andre gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, Officer James Rutherford watched from the doorway of Powell's office, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, shame, anger, fear, and the dawning realization that the man he had racially profiled and humiliated now literally held his father's life in his hands. Dr. Andre Wilson arrived at Mercy General Hospital at 5:30 a.m., earlier than necessary, but unable to sleep after the previous night's events. The hospital corridors were quiet, the silence a welcome contrast to the chaos of the police station. He changed into his scrubs methodically, the familiar routine grounding him. His phone vibrated with a text message from his wife, Natalie. You've got this. Love you. She had listened patiently last night as he recounted the incident, her anger gradually giving way to concern about today's surgery. What will you do? She had asked. Andre hadn't answered then. He wasn't entirely sure himself. As Andre reviewed the commissioner's scans one final time, the door to the preparation room opened. Dr. Vanessa Patel, 42, his trusted colleague, entered with 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said, handing him a cup. Heard you had quite an eventful night. Andre accepted the coffee gratefully. News travels fast. The commissioner's son is outside, Patel said quietly. Looks like he hasn't slept either. Andre paused. James Rutherford is here? Patel nodded. Has been since 4 a.m. according to the night nurses. His father's condition deteriorated overnight. The aneurysm is showing signs of expansion. We've moved surgery up to 6:30. Andre felt a twinge of concern. The change in timeline meant increased risk, but also increased urgency. Has the commissioner been notified of the change? Yes, he's being prepped now, Patel confirmed. Dr. Wilson. Andre, are you sure you want to proceed with this? Given what happened, no one would blame you if I refuse to operate on a critical patient because of his son's actions. Andre finished. That's not who I am, Vanessa. Before Patel could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the small window in the door, Andre could see Officer James Rutherford engaged in a heated conversation with hospital security. I need to speak with Dr. Wilson, Rutherford was insisting, his voice carrying through the door. It's about my father. Andre sighed, then nodded to Patel. Let him in. The door opened, and Rutherford entered, looking markedly different from the arrogant officer of the previous night. His uniform was replaced by rumpled civilian clothes, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or tears or both. Dr. Wilson, he began, then faltered. They said my father's condition has worsened. Andre gestured for Patel to give them privacy. Once she left, he faced Rutherford directly. The aneurysm is showing signs of expansion. We've moved the surgery up as a precaution. Rutherford nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't know about his condition. We haven't spoken much lately. That much was evident, Andre replied evenly. Look, Doctor, Rutherford struggled visibly with his words. What I did last night, there's no excuse. But my father, he needs you. I'm begging you to help him. Andre studied the man before him, so different from the intimidating figure who had handcuffed him just hours ago. I'm going to tell you something, Officer Rutherford. I recorded our entire interaction last night. My dashboard camera captured everything. Your fabricated probable cause, your unnecessary aggression, your illegal search. Rutherford paled. You're going to report me. I already have, Andre confirmed, pulling out his phone to show an email confirmation from Internal Affairs. But that has nothing to do with your father's care. What do you mean? I mean that despite what you did, despite how you treated me, I took an oath as a physician that I intend to honor. Your father will receive the best care I can provide, regardless of my personal feelings about you or this situation. Rutherford stared at him, confusion evident. Just like that? After what I did? No, not just like that, Andre replied firmly. The complaint stands. The footage has been submitted. Your career, as you know, it is likely over, Officer Rutherford. But your father's life shouldn't be. A nurse knocked and entered. Dr. Wilson, we're ready for you, enter 3. Andre nodded, gathering his materials. I have to go. Will he survive this? Rutherford asked, vulnerability cracking through his facade. That's what I'm going to find out, Andre replied, moving toward the door. He paused, turning back. Your father's procedure is complex. The location of the aneurysm makes it particularly challenging. Only a handful of surgeons in the country perform this specific approach. Understanding dawned on Rutherford's face. So last night when I arrested you, you nearly prevented the only qualified surgeon in the state from operating on your father, Andre confirmed. Actions have consequences, Officer Rutherford. Remember that. The operating room was a controlled environment of focused energy as Andre prepared for the delicate procedure. Commissioner Richard Rutherford lay sedated on the table, vulnerable in a way his son had never seen him. Vital signs stable, the anesthesiologist reported as Andre positioned himself at the operating microscope. Beginning temporal approach, Andre announced, his voice calm and measured as he made the initial incision. 4 hours into the painstaking procedure, a critical moment arrived. The aneurysm, larger and more complex than the scans had indicated, presented a challenge that would test Andre's considerable skills. Proximal control established, he stated. Preparing for final clip placement. In the observation room above, James Rutherford watched, barely breathing, as the surgeon he had humiliated and arrested worked to save his father's life. Beside him, Lieutenant Powell maintained a silent vigil. The clip isn't holding, Andre's voice came through the speakers. There's too much pressure. We need to revise our approach. The tension in the operating room was palpable as Andre made a split-second decision that only someone with his specialized training could execute. Implementing bypass technique, he announced. Preparing donor vessel. For another 2 hours, Andre worked with preternatural focus, his hands steady as he created an alternate route for blood flow around a dangerous bulge in the commissioner's artery. It was a technique few surgeons could perform, requiring both extensive experience and natural talent. In the observation room, Powell turned to Rutherford. Do you understand now? Do you see what you almost prevented from happening? Rutherford couldn't take his eyes off the surgical field. I do, he whispered. Finally, Andre stepped back from the operating table. Aneurysm secured. Bypass functioning well. Let's begin closure. As the surgical team completed the procedure, Andre looked up briefly to the observation window, making momentary eye contact with Officer Rutherford before returning his attention to his patient. 3 days later, Commissioner Richard Rutherford opened his eyes in the recovery room to find his son sitting beside his bed. The older man's gaze was clearer than it had been in months, the dangerous pressure on his brain now relieved. James, he said softly, his voice raspy from the breathing tube. Dad, Rutherford replied, leaning forward. How do you feel? Like someone's been inside my head, the commissioner answered with a weak smile. Where's Dr. Wilson? I want to thank him. James hesitated, then spoke. Dad, there's something I need to tell you about Dr. Wilson. Over the next 10 minutes, James confessed everything, the traffic stop, the racial profiling, the arrest, holding nothing back as his father's expression grew increasingly troubled. You did what? The commissioner finally asked, his voice stronger now, edged with anger. I'm sorry, James said, his head bowed. I've been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. There's video evidence. The commissioner closed his eyes briefly. As there should be, he said finally. I know, James admitted. And yet he still operated on you. Saved your life when he could have walked away. Because he's a better man than either of us deserved, the commissioner stated flatly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Andre Wilson entered, white coat impeccable, tablet in hand. Commissioner Rutherford, Andre greeted professionally. Good to see you awake. Your post-operative scans look excellent. Dr. Wilson, the commissioner replied. My son has just been telling me about your previous encounter. Andre's expression remained neutral. I'm here to discuss your recovery, Commissioner. Not that incident. Well, I wish to discuss it, the commissioner insisted. What my son did was inexcusable. And as head of this department, I need to address it. Dad, please rest, James began. No, the older Rutherford cut him off. Dr. Wilson, I understand you filed a formal complaint. Andre nodded. I have. With video evidence. Good, the commissioner said firmly, surprising both men. Because I intend to use this incident as a catalyst for real change in this department. James won't just face suspension, he'll face the full consequences of his actions. James looked up, shock evident on his face. Dad, you made your choices, son, the commissioner replied sternly. Now you face the consequences. Just as Dr. Wilson said. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. Police commissioner implements sweeping reforms following racial profiling incident. The article detailed how Commissioner Rutherford, following his recovery from brain surgery, had mandated comprehensive anti-bias training, body cameras for all officers, and a civilian review board with actual enforcement power. And at the bottom of the article, a smaller headline, Officer terminated after racial profiling incident involving surgeon. James Rutherford cleaned out his desk under the watchful eyes of his former colleagues. Lieutenant Powell stood nearby as he surrendered his badge and gun. Where will you go? She asked as he prepared to leave. Community college, he replied quietly. Social work program. Powell raised an eyebrow. Quite a change. Long overdue, James admitted, picking up his box of belongings. As he walked out of the station for the last time, he noticed a familiar Tesla parked across the street. Dr. Andre Wilson leaned against it, arms crossed, watching. James approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Dr. Wilson? Mr. Rutherford, Andre replied, emphasizing the change in title. I wanted to thank you, James said. Not just for my father, but for the lesson. Did you learn it? Andre asked directly. James nodded. The hardest way possible. But yes. Good, Andre said simply. Because that's the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile. As James walked away, Andre watched him go, reflecting on how a single traffic stop had changed both their lives forever. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through accountability and the powerful reminder that actions, both harmful and healing, carried consequences that reached far beyond the moment they were made.